rest in peace to my reading slumps, because these books right here ripped me out of it. These are 10 books that you need to read. To give you some context on just how good these books are, there's about 4 of them that once I actually started reading it, made the mistake of doing it midday. I ended up canceling any sort of plan I have for the rest of the day because I needed to finish it. So we have quite the variety here. I have some pretty twisted, mind warping type books, mystery, some good classic romance. We've got it all. I missed filming these videos. I've made so many of them over the past few years, and then I just dropped off the face of the earth with them because I was going through such a deep reading slump. These will surely get you out of yours if you're also in one, or if you're not and you want some good reads, these are for you. I'm gonna start off by talking about this 2-part book series that simultaneously brought me back to life and also ruined my life. Ruined my life in the sense that as soon as I started reading it, I could not do anything else, which is obviously nice when you find a book like that. But it was also like, I cannot stop reading this until I figure out what happens. It's a very psychological, twisty, suspense, mystery book. Up until now, I never really fully dived into this genre of books. The first book I ever read that was like a psychological thriller was The Silent Patient, and it's one of my favorite books. And I think that these might trump that, which is crazy because that was one of my favorite 5-star reads from 2021, I think. But it is the Housemaid series by Frida McFadden. I have become to create such an obsession with this author, just the way she writes, creates these stories that I'm like, how are you coming up with this? I'm kind of concerned that you're able to think of stuff like this. I was extremely hooked on this first book, so when I found out that there was a part 2, I was so excited. And I will say sometimes with 2-part series, the second book isn't nearly as good as the first, but I would say it is, which is really nice. The Housemaid follows the story of this woman named Millie who has a criminal record, a criminal past. She's trying to move past it, move forward with her life, but she's having hard finding a job. So she lands this housemaid opportunity for this very wealthy family. And while you get to know the characters more, you kind of uncover that both Millie, the employee, and the employer, the Winchester, I think, yeah, Winchester family, all have a lot of secrets. Millie ends up landing the job of being a live-in housemaid, not in a situation where it's like, oh, I get to live in this beautiful big house. She gets put into this tiny attic room and the door only locks from the outside, which she's like, okay, it's a little weird, but she's desperate at this point, so she continues working there. And the more time she spends around this family, the more she realizes how weird and twisted the dynamic is between the wife, the husband, their daughter. Nina, who is the wife, she kind of seems to have it out for Millie, keeps making messes uncalled for Millie to clean. Cecilia, who is the daughter, is kind of a spoiled brat. She's 9 years old. And then there's Andrew, who is the husband, which Millie kind of grows a liking towards. The longer Millie stays there, the weirder it starts to get. She ends up finding out from the kid's nanny that Nina had spent time at a psychiatric hospital and suffers from mental illness, and she had tried to end her own daughter's life previously. So over the course of this story, you're finding out so many different pieces of information. I feel like my mind was being tugged in so many different ways. I was like, okay, this is what's happening. And then it was like, oh, here's another piece of information. And it just got so crazy, but like also fun to read, especially because of the dynamic between the husband and the housemaid. But what my favorite part was about this book is that everything is not what it seems. You think that you're right in your assumptions while you're reading. You're like, oh, this is definitely what's gonna happen here. So I was hooked on this, and then I picked up The Housemaid's Secret, and it follows Millie's story in another situation that's honestly kind of similar, but not too similar that it was predictable and boring. I feel like it was the perfect continuation of the first one. Millie ends up working for another very rich couple, the Garricks, and Mr. Garrick makes it very clear that she is not to enter Mrs. Garrick's room because she's very ill. But different things that happen and her suspicions, Millie just ends up feeling like that's not the whole truth. And she kind of felt like it was weird that he was like, this room is off limits, under no circumstance can you enter here. While she's working there, Millie will hear crying from the wife's room. She finds it really weird, and then one day when she's doing laundry, she notices on Mrs. Garrett's nightgown that there's spots of blood on it. So against the rules that she's forbidden to go inside the room, she finally goes in, what she sees changes everything. And she kind of makes this promise to the wife that she's gonna do whatever she needs to protect her. And given the past, given Millie's past, which you'll kind of see how crazy this girl gets, you kind of just assume the worst. But even as I'm giving the synopsis, it just does not do justice for the plot twists that are in this book that you will literally just never see coming. And that's honestly my favorite. I love when books keep me on my toes. So after these books, I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna start reading more mystery, suspense, psychological type of books. This completely got me enthralled with them, and I ended up buying more of her books. So I'm clearly a big fan of this writer. Even if you're not super into these types of books, I would just give it a shot. Obviously, before you read any book, read whatever trigger warnings that are given, just so you know if a topic is sensitive for you. All right, on a lighter note, we have a book called 1,000 Boy Kisses by Tilly Cole. And clearly, by the title, it's a romance book. I just finished this actually because I was like, okay, I think I need a break from all this messed up stuff. Let's make it light. This book was anything but that. I really didn't quite understand what I was getting myself into. The dedication of this book says, for believers in true, epic, soul-shattering love, this one's for you. So I was like, great. I will say, being 22 now, kind of maturing past YA romance, young adult romance, I feel like younger me would have absolutely loved and adored this book just because the two characters, the boy and girl, are in high school, and so obviously I can't resonate and like relate to that as much anymore, but I still really enjoyed reading it. I felt like I was reading it for younger me. It follows a story of this boy and girl who grew up together, become the best of friends, end up forming this beautiful, you know, best friends to lovers kind of trope. My favorite. In the beginning of the book, the girl whose name is Poppy, her grandmother is dying, and the last thing that her grandmother tells Poppy before she passes is that she wants her to collect 1,000 boy kisses because that's what her grandma did with her grandpa because she was so in love. So she gives her this jar with mini paper hearts in it. There's 1,000 of them, and her wish for Poppy is to write down all of the kisses that she has with the soulmate that she finds, to write down each kiss, when it happened, any kiss that was just extraordinary that, you know, made your heart burst, that kind of thing. So it really sets the tone. I'm like, this is so sweet. And that happens when Poppy is really young. So her grandmother's goal for her was to collect all of these kisses with her true love one day and make the memory out of it. Poppy and the boy, whose name is Rune, form this really deep and meaningful connection from a very young age, and they grow up together, they fall in love, and they create a bond that they think will last a lifetime. But Rune goes back to his hometown. He came from Norway originally, and the book is set in Georgia. He gets separated from Poppy, and they had not been apart for about a decade. And she ends up ghosting him without any explanation. He's gone for 2 years, he comes back, he's a completely different person because he got his soul shattered by his childhood love, and he uncovers the truth about why Poppy really did what she did. This book has a lot of highs, a lot of lows, a lot of heartbreak, a lot of whatever the opposite of heartbreak is, like just moments where you want to believe in soulmates and true love. I feel like the author really encapsulated that bond and connection that you form with someone, especially when you're that young and you kind of go into things so blindly, you love so hard because you just think nothing bad can happen. I really like this book because it's told in a dual perspective. So you get Rune's perspective and you also get Poppy's perspective, which I always really enjoy, especially when it's a romance book between two people. You kind of get into the heads of both characters and get to kind of understand them more. This book made me cry in the first 14 pages, I think it was. And it sure didn't stop there. If you've read this, you can understand why, but it was a little cheesy at some points. I was like, again, high school me would have loved this, but nowadays I'm like, you know, not as much. But I really, really liked this. I gave this, I think, 4 stars. What I thought was gonna be a light little romance read, it turned out to be quite the opposite. But I like when books actually make you feel something and you can relate to them in different ways. So if you want your heart to simultaneously soar into the clouds, but also get crushed, this book is for you. The next book that I really loved was called Then She Was Gone by Lisa Jewell. It's a suspense book. It's about a family drama. This girl, Ellie Mack, goes missing out of nowhere, drops off the face of the earth. So it follows the story of her mom, whose name is Laurel, trying to piece back her own life together, piece back her family, and figure out what happened to her daughter. And while she's going through all of this, Laurel ends up meeting a man named Floyd. And when she meets Floyd's younger daughters, one of them is a very similar looking girl to Ellie. And she's like, okay, that's weird. And not only similar in looks, but also their personalities, the mannerisms. So it ends up bringing up a lot for her and bringing up a lot of unanswered questions like, where did Ellie go? Is she alive? Is she not alive? The police believe that Ellie ran away, but the mom just has a feeling that something a lot darker happened to her. So this story goes through her journey of uncovering the truth of what actually happened. And I feel like with this book, again, I thought I knew the answer. I was like, oh, this is definitely what the plot twist was gonna be. And it wasn't. And I'm like, do I not have a good gauge on things here? Because I could have sworn that's where this book was heading, but I really enjoyed this author. I feel like there were aspects to this book where I was like, how did you even come up with this? The more you read, the further you get into the book, the closer you get to finding out the truth of what actually happened. If I were to put this book on a scale of, whoa, that's pretty shocking, to my brain just melted, I feel like it would fall somewhere in the middle. I got recommended this book ages ago. It's been sitting on my shelf, but I didn't have a chance or really want to read it until recently. It's Love in Other Words by Christina Lauren, which I didn't realize it's two different people. One is Christina, one is Lauren, so it's double author. And it's just your classic romance. This is between adults, so again, I felt like with the other one, it was more based in high school, so I didn't relate to it as much, but this one I definitely did. It's about this woman who is creating this life for herself. Her name is Macy. I literally have to remind myself what her name was because I'm not gonna lie, I forget books 2 days after I read them, so I'm like frantically reading the backs of these books to be like, what was this even about? She's building up her life, is recently engaged, but then she ends up running into the one boy, the one man now, who just stops her whole world, and they meet again because they had been separated for a very long time because of events that you'll read about in the book. But there's this falling out that they talk about in the book that you're like, what could have happened that you went from being soulmates and thinking that you were gonna marry this person to just going dark and ghosting each other's lives? You figure out and you read about what that was. But over the time that they spent apart, she never really got over it. So him re-entering the picture really shakes up her life. It makes her question her engagement. And now they're reunited as adults, and they've also become strangers after their decade long of silence and being apart. They start to try and rebuild their friendship while simultaneously trying to understand what happened on that one night all those years ago that just caused the death of their relationship. It's told in an alternating timeline of then and now, which I really liked because it gave you a perspective of what's going on as adults, but then it flashed back to what it was like back then when they were just teenagers, and it really gives you that backstory. So it gives you that attachment to the characters because you start to fall in love with them back then, but then when it goes back to now, it's like, so because of that, you end up really rooting for these characters and just kind of cross your fingers that they try to figure it out and rebuild what was broken so many years ago. So that's what this love story is about. I feel like it's very dynamic. It's also just a lot more carefree than 1,000 Boy Kisses, but it's still a very interesting read. It's not like I really turned my life upside down to finish this book. And it was a little bit of a slower, more steady pace of a read, but I feel like it's good to have that. Not every book can be like, you know, just take over your whole life. So if you're looking to restore your faith in love a little bit, let's talk about this book. It is Too Late by Colleen Hoover. It's been a while since I read a book from her. I actually thought this was new because I've never seen it before, but it was actually written in 2013 or 2012, I think, but it got republished, a little bit rewritten. Initially, it was just for reading on like a website. I think was it Wattpad? I don't know, but it wasn't published until now, and it's a psychological suspense book. just my cup of tea. I was really hoping to find something similar to Verity, which is one of my all-time favorite reads. It's the most twisted book that I've ever read, also by Colleen Hoover. And so I was like, hopefully this one gives me that same feeling, because I've just been searching for that same, like, just mind bend, like, my mind. I wanted to feel that way again. Like after I read Verity. If you've read Verity, you understand what I'm saying. I've been chasing that feeling ever since. I will say this book does have quite a few serious trigger warnings that include foul language, graphic sexual scenes, murder, sexual assault, and drug use. So if you are sensitive to any of those topics, please exercise caution if you plan to read this book, or just don't read it. But literally in the note written by Colleen before getting into it, it says, "For some of you, it'll be an entertaining read. For others, it may be hard to stomach. This book is in no way appropriate for children or young teens. Proceed with caution." And that to me just made me personally intrigued. I was like, okay, what's going on here? This book follows the story of a girl named Sloane who will literally do anything for the people that she loves, almost to a fault, even if it means putting herself in really dangerous or bad situations. She's living with this guy named Asa in this huge house. He's a drug lord, and he's kind of the mastermind behind the whole drug operations at this college that she goes to. And she feels stuck with him because he supports her financially, not only her, but also her brother named Stefan, who is mentally challenged and lives in a group home, but he had lost state funding. And so she needed Asa and his money to help support her brother. And so she's in this really bad situation. Asa's not a good guy. The people he surrounds himself with are very dangerous, just not good people, but Sloane stays with him for her brother. And then enters Carter, this undercover cop who's masquerading, pretending to be a college student, but he's working for the police, doing this investigation to bust this whole drug thing, bust Asa, bust all of Asa's buddies. And he ends up meeting Sloane in Spanish class. Sloane finds immediate attraction to him, attraction to Carter. She has no idea that he's not even a college student. He's not even who he says he is. And he has no idea that Sloane is caught up with this Asa guy. They both kind of start forming this attraction to each other, which is a really dangerous situation because Asa is a crazy, dangerous guy. And so it kind of forms this little undercover love triangle thing. But we all know the thing about love triangles, people always find out the truth. So Carter, the undercover cop, is forming these feelings for Sloane while also trying to do his job and bust Asa, but Sloane is so closely in the same circle as Asa that it makes it this really difficult situation. And when shit hits the fan in this book, I literally laid on my carpet floor for 5 hours straight finishing it because I was just like, oh my gosh. You get two guys that are in love with this girl, and that's one part of the equation. And then there's also the other part where Asa starts getting suspicions about Carter, and Sloane is so desperate to escape the life that she's in with Asa. But if there's one thing about Asa, it's that he's one step ahead of everyone. He doesn't let anyone else get in his way, except for Carter. I feel like not only is this book suspenseful, but it also just has that dangerous and forbidden love aspect. And what I love is that it's told in alternating storylines. So you're getting Sloane, Carter's, and Asa's perspective. And the further you get, I feel like the more twisted it gets, the more intertwined Sloane gets, and you're so desperately rooting for her to get out. You're rooting for her and Carter, but Asa does not make that easy. So exercise caution if you're gonna read this book. If you are on the younger side, do not read this. There definitely are some uncomfortable scenes in here, so I would just keep that in mind. But reading this felt like a race to the finish line to just see what happens. Surprise, surprise, another Frida McFadden book, and it doesn't stop here. I have a few more, but this is The Locked Door. It's definitely a little bit of a shorter read. It's about this woman named Nora Davis who has a really messed up childhood. She had no idea that her father was bringing women into their basement door, which was locked, and killing them, until one day when the police finally showed up and uncovered the truth. So now she's living her life, she's a surgeon, and nobody knows that she's the daughter whose father is a murderer. But then things take a turn when one of her patients gets murdered in the same exact way, same MO as her father used to kill people. and she knows that someone knows who she is and kind of has it out for her. Nora isn't a killer like her father, but somebody out there knows who she is and is trying to pin it on her, but she remains innocent as long as they don't look in her basement. Another really good suspense book. What I appreciate about this author is that all of her books are this similar genre, obviously, but they don't have similarities, because after I read a few, I was like, okay, maybe there's patterns in the writing here and I can kind of figure out mid-reading what's going on. That's never been the case, and I've always been wrong. This wasn't one of my top favorites by her, but it was definitely up there. And then I read her book, The Inmate, which follows the story of this woman named Brooke who works at a very high security prison as a nurse practitioner, I think there, taking care of the inmates. All's okay and fine until in walks the inmate, Shane Nelson, her ex-boyfriend from high school, who was arrested and charged for the murder of multiple people, and Brooke is the one who stood trial and testified against him. So she's the one who put him in prison. But Shane, the inmate, believes a completely different story. And so this whole book follows him trying to prove his innocence to her and convince her that he wasn't the one who committed those murders all those years ago, which she was there, which is why she testified against him. But the messed up part is that she testified against him not even being truthful about what she saw. So he's trying to prove his innocence to her. There's also just so many different aspects to this book. At first, he has no idea that she ended up having his baby and she was pregnant with their child, even though he had no idea at the time because he got put in prison. So all these years later, he's finding out about that, and that adds a whole different aspect. But Shane is willing to do anything to get out of this situation. And I feel like what made this book really interesting, basically with the whole murders that happened, it was between a group of friends, which Shane and Brooke were a part of. And another part of that group of friends was one of Brooke's best friends, one of her best guy friends, who also comes back into the picture, into her life, which just adds a whole other dynamic. He's telling her certain things about what happened, so is Shane, and nothing really adds up. So I was on the edge of my seat reading this book. It was the kind of situation where I was like, okay, everyone's telling a different story. I don't know who to believe. And finally, the truth gets uncovered, and it's a very interesting turn of events. I finally got to read Happy Place by Emily Henry, which was a very highly anticipated book this year. I like her writing. Honestly, it's really sweet, and I feel like it's just very light, especially in comparison to the other books that I read. It's about this group of college friends who are now adults reuniting for their yearly trip, their summer trip to Maine. Two of the main characters in this book, Harriet and Wynn, they were always the perfect couple back in the day. They were engaged, and so all their friends think that, up until a few months ago when they ended their engagement, but none of their friends know. But they're still going on this yearly summer getaway trip together. And so this trip is kind of their time to reconnect. They all have busy, separate, different lives, living in other states. So this is their one time of year that they all get to be with each other. So what usually was their favorite time of year kind of turns into this, what the heck are we gonna do? This sucks. I have to share a room with my ex-fiance. It's a dual timeline book going from the present moment back to Happy Place, which is why the book is titled what it's titled, because that place used to be their absolute favorite place to be, where they all have the best memories. But now they're needing to pretend that everything's okay in front of their friends, when in reality, everything kind of went down the gutter. So the story follows all of the friends, and I feel like this book just does a really good job at friendships as an adult and how they change and how it looks. And Harriet and Wynn have this plan to fake it for 1 week while they're with their friends. But the question is, can they do it in front of the people who know them best? I thought it was a really sweet read. It's about reconnecting, friendships, and for some reason, I didn't think I was actually gonna get as into it as I did. I read the entire book on a plane ride. I feel like Emily does a really good job at creating these characters and writing about them in such a way that you feel genuinely connected to them and like you know them personally, which always just makes for a good book. All right, and last but not least, I'm finishing it off with another Frida McFadden book. Like I said, we're not shocked. This is my favorite author right now, and it is the book Never Lie. And let me tell you, I was hooked by chapter 2. It gave me a very similar vibe to The Silent Patient, but it was also different in its own ways. But if you've read The Silent Patient, I think you'd really like this. I had no idea what was coming for me when I read this. And so this was one of those books where my jaw physically dropped open, which is always fun. I like when a book makes you feel something. It's about these two newlyweds, Trisha and Ethan, who are looking for their new house, and they find this place on the market. It's this huge, beautiful mansion in the middle of nowhere. And upon arriving there, they realized that it was the home of this very popular, renowned psychiatrist, Dr. Adrian Howell, who had vanished off the face of the earth a few years earlier. So they end up doing this open house. The realtor doesn't show up, and they end up getting blizzard in. So they're in the middle of nowhere, stuck at this house. It's blizzarding outside, so they can't leave, and they end up staying at that house. And the snowstorm lasts a few days, so they're spending a few nights in this creepy, huge mansion. And while they're there, Trisha is looking for a book to read. So she's looking through the bookcase, ends up pulling one of the books, and a secret door opens up. And it leads to this secret room that contains audio tapes that the psychiatrist, Dr. Hale, had recorded of every single patient. And so out of curiosity, Trisha starts to read these messed up tapes, listening to these sessions that the psychiatrist had with her patients, and she begins to uncover the chain of events that led up to her disappearance. She's starting to put together these pieces of a puzzle, uncovering more of a horrifying truth, while simultaneously staying in this empty mansion with no cell service. They're stuck in there, and some weird events start happening that can't be explained, like different noises coming from parts of the house when they search the house and they can't find anyone in there, a light being turned on that neither of them had turned on, a painting of the psychiatrist that they had taken off the wall because they thought it was creepy, and they saw it put back up on the wall, but neither of them had touched it. So it gets a little scary. You're like, what's going on here? And I just remember being halfway through this and I was like, I think I know what's gonna happen. And it's crazy. And I was very wrong. It took a turn that I never expected. I love a good plot twist. And I feel like in Frida's books, there's always more than one. So it really keeps you on your toes. And those are all the books that I've read recently that I really enjoyed. I hope you guys liked this video. Hopefully my explanation of these books was good, because like I said, this thing happens to me where I can't tell you what a book is about a few days after I'm done reading it, because I'm always on to the next. And I also just I have no memory when it comes to books. But I can assure you that you should trust me when I tell you that these are really fun, really enticing reads that I think you will like. I've got a mix of romance and mystery, so if mystery isn't your thing, definitely give these romance books a chance, and vice versa. I'll link all these books down below. If you stayed to this point in the video, first of all, you're a real one, and second of all, comment down below the book emoji, obviously, and also let me know what your recent favorite book is so that I can add it to my TBR list. And if you haven't read any of these books yet, I'm severely jealous of you, because I would give my big toe to read these again for the first time, and then some.